was getting a bit crazy. But just back on the story, just the interesting note there. The tongues was actually sort of a fulfillment. I don't know if you would agree, of Isaiah 28:11, which says, "For with stammering lips and another tongue will he speak to his people." Where God was basically saying that if Israel will fail to eat his message, then he will take his message to everyone else, to Gentiles, and Acts 2 was basically a fulfillment of that.
Very, very possible. I tend to lean in that direction. It's hard to say conclusively, but it certainly looks that way.
Just one more thing. What I've found myself, I've sort of had lots of conversation with tongue speakers. Now, I used to be one myself. But I've had a lot of conversations with tongue speakers, and what I've seen is they have to, twist scripture quite out of proportion to actually make the case for tongues. Just one example, I think it is where Paul says, "Thou art speaking to the..." Sorry.
Oh, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 1. Yep.
"Thou art speaking the tongues of men and of angels," which to me, if you read it very clearly, he's actually not saying he actually did speak in those tongues, but he's making like a hyperbolic statement. He's using hyperbolic language. He's over-exaggerating to make a point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If I do all these amazing things, but I don't have love, I'm no more than a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. I'm just making noise. Nobody can understand what I'm saying, but I'm just making noise. And I'm not doing it in love. I'm not doing it to glorify God. Something else to consider there too is that if we're to conclude that tongues are really angelic, an angelic language, well, consider this: all those who believe they speak in tongues, when you go to a hyper-charismatic church, everybody has literally their own tongue. Everybody speaks with a different accent. Everybody's got their own sounds. And so then are we to conclude that there are literally, and I mean literally, hundreds of thousands of different angelic languages?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't really work.
And all the in the Old Testament, anytime an angel appeared, they always spoke to the people in their own language. There was,
correct.
You can't even go there for any proof of an angelic tongue. So there is basically no proof of that. But my point with that would be, I think the follow-on verses in that chapter goes on to say, Paul makes the point that even if he gave his body to be burnt, but did not have love, and he makes cases like that. So he's actually exaggerating to make a point. He's not saying that he actually did those things. Now,
right.
What I find with a lot of tongue speakers, they would say, well, Paul is saying here he's speaking in an angelic language, but that's not actually what he's saying. He's saying even if he did. And also I find the same with 1 Corinthians 14, where Paul in a way is actually discouraging some of the tongue speaking that was going on. And it is used these days as proof of why we should do it. And a lot of the things he was saying was why we shouldn't be doing it. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Oh, yeah. It's, 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 2, "He that speaketh in an unknown tongue speaketh not unto men, but unto God. For no man understandeth him, howbeit in the Spirit he speaketh mysteries." So, it's argued, hey, look, tongues are not to speak to man, but unto God. But it doesn't follow when you look at Acts chapter 2, who were the apostles speaking to? Were they speaking to God or to men? See, it clearly says that everybody heard them speak in his own language. So what is Paul trying to say here in chapter 14 of 1 Corinthians? He's saying, when you go into a church, okay, keep in mind, this follows 1 Corinthians chapter 13, that amazing chapter on love. Well, in context, we're doing this out of love to glorify God. So Paul's saying that if we speak at church in tongues and no one is there to interpret, no one's going to be edified. but the person that's speaking. The people that hear them speak are not going to understand a word they're saying. The person that's speaking isn't going to understand a word they're saying. The only one that would actually understand is God. And again, this was written during a time where tongues were being spoken, and it was biblical. There were biblical tongues. Now, whether or not tongues are for today is a whole nother show, I'm sure. That's a whole nother debate. All I got to say on that subject is I have heard literally probably thousands of people speak in their own tongue, and I am 100% convinced not a single one of them have spoken in real biblical tongues. It's all just kind of a short little phrase or sentence, maybe a couple sentences, and said over and over again. Sorry about that. I got rabbit trailed there, but
Well, what is interesting about this is the Bible also says that not everybody has the gift. And in modern day churches, they would convince you that everyone has to speak in tongues.
Right.
And Paul clearly says not everyone will, and not everyone will have all, everyone will have a certain gift, which I find quite interesting. And it's strange how they read past. Well, a lot of people just read past that. You really can't get past that fact that not everyone will have that. Even if the gift was in operation today, that not everyone would have the gift.
Right. And not only that, but it's referred to as the least of the gifts. The least. So.
Yeah. And it's most encouraged actually today, very, very strangely.
Yes. Yeah, unfortunately. And it's interesting too, just something else to think about is tongues were never spoken by the early church. It was something that seemed to have stopped shortly after the time of the apostles. Mm-hmm. And it was something that did not happen at church or was not believed to even happen until the 19th, 20th centuries. So, that's something to chew on as well.
Get a name now, Agnes Osman, am I right?
I believe so, yeah.
Who was the first one to speak in tongues, and I think she thought she was speaking French. Not French, sorry, Chinese. And I think she scribbled some of it down, and it was not Chinese at all. But it's just caught on from there, like a wildfire.
Oh, and something that's also somewhat lamentable is, have you ever seen anybody type in tongues?
I saw the one Facebook prophet or the one prophetess, sorry. I can't remember her name that tried to speak in tongues. It's I thought it was a cat that just ran across the keyboard or something, but I don't know if you could understand it, but I could not.
Oh, it's during the Todd Bentley Lakeland revival, there was this God TV channel. And they had an online chat that, was very, very alive. There were, I don't even know how many hundreds and hundreds of people were on there at any given time. And most of them would say some words in English and then just type out a pile of just random letters. Sure. And you look at it, and again, you're going, guys, there's hardly any vowels mixed in. I'm not sure how you're going to get anything out of that. I can guarantee it's not any language. In fact, I can cut and copy it into Google, and it's not going to give me anything, except for this thread. So yeah, it's sad. It really is.
Yeah, I've actually been doing some reading on the internet. There's actually been quite a few cases, probably in the hundreds, where things have been going on where people would actually be cursing in a foreign language and not know it. I actually got some of it out of his name, Kurt Koch. I don't know if you remember him. He wrote Occult ABC. He's got some interesting stories about that, and I think Meryl Unger was another person.
Huh.
And quite a few other people, which leads me to believe that not all of it might be very, so innocent as we think. That some of it might have a bit of a darker influence. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. And for all my regular listeners, you know that I generally don't strap on a tinfoil hat, but I'm going to do it right now because I come from a background of the occult. I've run in occult circles, and I know that from the world of the occult, tongues are spoken as well.
Mm.
I also know that witches, one of the highest callings of a witch is to infiltrate a church and to be one of the flock, if you will, to mix in and then start causing problems. And I've experienced this firsthand where I've met one. She infiltrated the church, and when everybody is in cacophony and it's all chaos and everybody's speaking in tongues, she is speaking in her demonic tongue, if you will, and who knows what she's saying. I don't know. But getting back to just the world of the occult, absolutely, tongues are spoken in that realm, as well as a lot of the manifestations that you see in hypercharismatic churches where people start twitching and roaring like lions and falling over on the floor and having, almost like a seizure on the floor. These types of things, that's very common in the world of the occult.
Yeah.
So, my old hypercharismatic pastor would make a comment to the effect of Satan is the greatest counterfeiter. Yeah, that may be so, but as far as I can tell, these types of actions actually come from the world of the occult, and then they make it into the church. And there's so much of the New Age that is now intermingling in with the church. It's a sad time. It really is. And the Bible does say that in the last times, evil men and seducers will wax worse and worse. There'll be a great falling away, and we're starting to see that in front of our very eyes.
Yeah, I think we get tongues in Mormonism. There's something similar in Voodoo. I've heard, I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard that in some Muslim sects, you also get a form of tongues.
Yes, I have seen that. Yes.
So it's not limited to Christianity. So it is one of those things that we have to take seriously, because the bottom line is, if modern day tongues is biblical, then we should all be doing it, and if it's not, then we should all stop doing it. And it's not something that we can take very lightly these days.
Exactly. And if there's any doubt, friends, listeners, if there's any doubt that what you're doing is not biblical, push the pause button, on this particular practice, and hit the scriptures really hard and find out if it's true or not. Find out if this is something you're supposed to be doing. We all should be really concerned about following the Lord in a way that pleases him. And if there's anything that doesn't feel right, if there's anything that there is any good argument that you might be in the wrong track, check the Bible. Make sure you're doing the right things. This is not a salvation issue. You're not going to burn for speaking in tongues or not speaking in tongues, okay? But is it pleasing the Lord? And that's what we should be always thinking. What am I doing? Is it pleasing the Lord? What does the Bible say?
Okay. Just one thing there. There is one sort of series that I can recommend. I listened to, when I came out of the charismatic movement, the first one I listened to on the topic of tongues was John MacArthur. That made a series on it that I thought was very, very informative, and that's basically one of the series that convinced me that that I was doing the wrong thing. But now that I've listened to your series on tongues was also very, very good. And
thank you.
People can find that on Sermon Audio, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you go into Sermon Audio and type in tongues, probably a little bit easier to type in Youth Apologetics Training and then find my page and then type in tongues. But yeah, I have a 2-part series on the subject, and boy, it has stirred up a lot. I've had a lot of feedback on that series.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, someone has to get the conversation started, right?
Amen.
I would like to thank you. It's we've had a quick discussion, and in the future I plan to do a bit of a series on tongues. But I would like to thank you for coming onto the show and discussing this briefly with us. As I said before, we can find your audio sermons, your audio podcasts on sermonaudio.com and your website, youthapologeticstraining.com.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I want to thank you for being on our show today.
Herman, it has been an honor. Thank you.